Yes, well, we got the 2-minute warning from George with his new bell. It is a very nice loud bell, George, thank you. And thank you for attending the Harvard Salons Raleigh. Please make sure that before you leave, you check in at the desk and register. And if it's your first time, welcome. Do we have any first timers here tonight? Oh, thank you very much for coming. Be sure to let me know after, and we can meet. I'm glad you have a name tag. Thank you very much. We have some people who've been coming for a long time and they've never used a name tag. So that's quite a development. Thank you. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. We're at the McGregor Downs Country Club in Cary, North Carolina. My name is Brad Taylor, and I am the Raleigh ambassador for the American Institute for Economic Research. And we've been doing this now for 3 years, since 2021. And mainly because of our success, we have been supported directly by AIR due to the attendance and popularity of our events, and to, of course, our wonderful speakers. Just to let you know a little bit about American Institute for Economic Research, they've been around since 1933. They were really started as a way of a pushback against the New Deal, and they are big proponents of entrepreneurship, capitalism, free markets. They have some of the top scholars in the United States, and they're constantly looking at the issues. I think they're probably a little happier now. I'm just guessing. The last couple of months, not totally happy, which Jessica can tell you a little bit more about. But basically, we're proud to be able to bring people from all walks of life together, including scholars and experts, lay people, business leaders, and we have addressed all kinds of topics from last month's tariffs and education, charter schools, property rights, limited government, all that great stuff. And we have a steering committee that's doing a wonderful job to help us come up with all sorts of new speakers. And if you have ideas, let us know. Today we're very proud to have Jessica Melugin from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I don't want to pretend to know all about her background, but she has an amazing focus on tech issues, including antitrust, online privacy, artificial intelligence, telecom, social media content, and net neutrality regulation. All that is very timely, and I will say that I met Jessica after she spoke at a Carolina Leadership Conference about 1.5 years ago, and what really impressed me about her is that not only is she very much of an expert, but she's also very personable, and just as a note, she was very communicative about staying in touch for today's event, because she lives in Washington, D.C., and they've had a terrible snowstorm, but she wanted to make sure she got here. We really appreciate that. And I won't say any much more. You can introduce more about your background. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have to prove myself as personable to you guys. Set up a high expectation. First, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I know it's cold, rainy, dark weeknight. You'd be at home being cozy, so we're going to whip right through this stuff. We're going to try to keep it interesting for you, but thank you for being here. My hope for you fine people is that being here in North Carolina has provided some insulation from the fire hose of political news in D.C. But I am here to ruin all of that for you tonight. And we'll focus on tech policy. We'll focus on 3 quick areas here. We'll do artificial intelligence, because everyone has to talk about it all the time. We'll do online speech, because I think it's really important and not enough people are talking about it. And we'll do antitrust policy, because it's also very important, and I have you trapped in this room to talk to you about it. Okay, so if you're still awake after all that, we'll do some questions. And if you are not a fellow policy nerd and you're just an innocent +1, you get yourself coffee whenever you need to. I will not be offended. Okay, here we go. Grab a coffee and hold on. Okay, so you've all heard plenty about artificial intelligence the last couple of years. And maybe you've been pleasantly surprised to learn you don't actually have to ever know what it is to be able to benefit from it, which I think is nice. But most broadly, AI is technology that uses data, algorithms, and computational power to mimic what were previously thought of as human cognitive tasks. And that's across just every area you can think of. Super fast, super smart computers. Good enough. It holds the promise of greatly improving how we work, learn, cure diseases, utilize energy, and generally improve our lives with a bunch of efficiency gains. But of course, like with every new technology, there's concerns about the inevitable challenges. And those around AI have really been kind of hysterical. It's true, though, that there are real concerns. I don't think that they're the end of humanity or AI taking over the world, but there is job displacement, perhaps increased misinformation, and kind of concerns you might already be running into in your lives, like students using AI to write papers, and concerns that our children's brains are melting. So I think there's a huge upside to AI, but those deliverables are going to come with challenges. So our central question is, what's the best policy framework where we get the upside of AI and we minimize the downsides? And the point I want to make to you tonight is all the good stuff we know about how to regulate in a smart way, everything else still applies to AI. So the first thing we know that works is a light touch. Meaning we should regulate around outcomes when they involve AI, if they happen and they're harmful, instead of adopting a precautionary principle, ex ante kind of environment that can prevent all the good stuff before it even gets started. And I feel like this room knows that everything is a trade-off. I feel like I don't have to defend that statement here, which is really pleasant. And we might indeed prevent some harms if we never allowed anyone to try anything new and uncertain, but we'd also miss out on all of the good stuff. That's sort of where we are at a very high level with AI. So for a recent and relevant case study, I will direct your attention to our friends in Europe, who have been kind enough to run the precautionary principle side of the experiment. And sadly for the residents of Europe, you can often count on them to do so. So we do see an increase in AI regulation here in the US, but for the most part, it's a light touch situation here still. So in contrast, the EU has spent the last year bragging about how it's the first to regulate AI. And they recently passed their AI Act. It was introduced, laid out for everyone to see what was going to be in it in 2021 and went into force last year. So if we look at the light touch approach the US has taken so far, and we look at the not so light touch approach of the EU, what do we find? We find that according to the Artificial Intelligence Index report from Stanford University, which is very fancy, the US saw private AI investment reach $67 billion in 2023. So remember that number, 67. So that's an increase of 22% for the previous year. During the same time, the EU and the UK combined, their investment was $11 billion. And that represented a decline of 14% from the previous year. So they're already, now of course there's other factors that could explain total investment in AI in different global regions, but I think we can say that the regulatory climate is a major factor in where people put their money. And I find that to be a big indicator of a lot of things, where people actually put their own money. And that reminds me of an exchange I had years ago with a regulator from the EU who was in the States. And we were on a panel, and I was making the point, gosh, your approach, this heavy-handed approach, you guys don't have one of the top 10 global tech companies that's based in Europe, not one. And I think, I don't know how many the US had at the time, I think it's 8. We're 8 out of 10, by the way, today, and it was similar to them. So I said, yeah, we have like 7 or 8, and you have none. And she looked at me and she said, exactly. And I looked at her and I said, exactly. And then I realized that's what they want. They don't want any big, huge, successful tech companies. And it's such a different mindset than the kind of American idea of what success is. You don't have to be big to be a success, but I think a lot of us are pretty comfortable with a lot of the conveniences those big companies bring. And I think in Europe, it really goes deep that they just, to them, it's just not worth it. I think about that a lot as I see them make bad decisions on AI and use American tech companies like ATMs. Okay, so it would be one thing if we overregulated right now on AI and we kind of never knew what we missed in terms of gains and we just matched the economic malaise of Europe. But unfortunately, the stakes are much higher than that because the US is in a global race with China for AI dominance. And we're probably only a few months in the lead. I would have told you a couple months ago we were maybe a year in the lead. But the DeepSeek development a couple weeks ago, I think has changed all of that. And whatever the accuracy of the numbers, investment numbers for DeepSeek are, as opposed to what DeepSeek was saying, how cheaply they did it, I wouldn't totally trust those numbers. But the point is that export controls on chips to China haven't been the silver bullet for winning that race. And China's spending billions through its government venture capital funds on AI investment. And I think DeepSeek really reminds us they're right there nipping at our heels. So the US losing to China on AI, what would that mean? It's a disadvantage, but how so? So global economic influence, military superiority, global standards for privacy, and broader ethical matters given the country's human rights record. And all of that would be Wuhan, which is Chinese for no bueno. See, you learned something tonight. So we want to resist going down that heavy-handed path. The other time it's true, I think we'd be wise to remember with AI, it doesn't change, is that regulators don't have crystal balls. They might have good intentions, but if they were really psychic about everything that was going to happen, they'd be getting rich investing in AI, not riding the crummy metro to work in DC to regulate everything, which I don't know how much longer they'll be doing, but sure. And I just think the AI space is sort of no exception to that lack of clairvoyance. And not being able to predict every risk, what they would have to do to prevent any risk would just end up killing the whole industry. And that's kind of what you see across the pond, where you have an AI regulatory structure that's way bigger than the AI industry itself. There really isn't much to speak of. Okay, so if we can agree Congress shouldn't do much, which is a deeply unsatisfying answer to most ambitious people in DC, what should Congress do? And the answer is even less politically exciting, and that's that Congress needs to preempt state AI regulation. Last year, 650 bills were introduced and passed in states trying to regulate AI. This year, total number federal and state, but the vast majority state, up around 600, and it's only February. So, our beloved part-time citizen legislatures and full-time attorneys, real estate agents, small business owners, I assume a good number of lucrative car dealerships, have seen fit to step in to direct the complicated and cutting-edge technology of deep and neural learning, billions of dollars in the making and critical to our national security. Now, these state lawmakers are no doubt bright and productive members of society with the best of intentions, but very, very few are computer scientists, and none of them are fortune tellers. But even if we pretended, okay, let's say these state legislators got all those state regulations right, somehow magically, even though they all differ from each other, they're all perfect. Even if you said that, and it's not true, but even if it was, I think we understand that 50 different regulatory regimes, different from state to state, make it pretty hard to race with China and other countries in AI, right? If you're here trying to comply with 50 different regulatory regimes, but state lawmakers are under a lot of pressure to do something, because Congress won't do something, so then people want them to do something. So, in order to remove that dangerous incentive, Congress is going to have to put on its big lawmaker pants and call Commerce Clause on this one. It's going to need to preempt those state AI laws. So, if we know what works, which is a light regulatory touch, encouraging investment, and a regime that doesn't change at every state border, why aren't we doing that? It is the subject of a whole another talk to dissect the current dysfunction of Congress, but I will sum it up for you on this cold evening by saying Congress has very little interest in doing its job, generally. And it would be great if some AI champions would appear in the House and the Senate, some guys who really saw the promise of this and took that up. I hope that with Trump's repeal of the Biden AI executive order, maybe someone will feel inspired. Vice President Vance, of all populists, gave a great speech in Paris on AI earlier this week, last week, I don't know. Time is a flat disk, people. So, maybe we'll see some heroes emerge in Congress, but one thing that makes it difficult for those people to materialize is the tech clash of the last several years. So that makes it tough for people to stand up and champion the next wave of technology, because so many people are still mad about the last wave. And that whole controversy centered a lot around perceived political bias of our country's biggest technology companies. Which brings us nicely to our second topic, online speech. See, we're already a third through, you're doing great. Okay, so you're all familiar with the online speech issues that are in the news. That is recent decision to pull fact checkers. We're going to move to a community notes. I don't know how many people are on social media. Maybe you're much more psychologically healthy than people like me who have to do it for work. What role government has played in restricting speech online, or a lot of the kids' online safety legislative vehicles we see. As you're thinking through all of those things, it's really important to remember what the First Amendment does and doesn't do, and, unfortunately, to understand the much maligned and much misunderstood Section 230. Bear with me. You are about to know more about Section 230 than 99% of America. The good news is it's a very low bar, and it's not going to take us long. Section 230. Written into the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Crazy thing, you say to Jessica, hey, we didn't even have these platforms in 1996. You're right. We had weird message boards that only nerds kind of interacted with. And there was a problem with those, because they were getting more and more popular, and people were posting things on these message boards. And the liability law around that content was really uncertain, because moving towards that, we're going to keep it quick, don't worry, stay with me. You had publisher liability, like if you were a book publisher, a newspaper, an advertiser, and if you're a publisher, you have a lot of liability for that content, because you have a lot of editorial control. You don't have to let that book out of your business until you fact-checked everything, right? Then you had distributor liability. Let's say you're a newsstand, or a bookstore, or a library. you have a little less liability because you're not involved in making that content, you're just getting it to customers, right? So the court said, we're gonna hold you less responsible. But as the liability cases around the third-party posts online were becoming a problem, it became clear that trying to apply those models to this was creating some bad incentives. Namely, if you were an online board and you thought, hey, I'd like families and children to spend a little time here, I'm gonna go ahead and take down pornography, violence, spam, all sorts of things a lot of people wouldn't want to see or let their kids see. See, then you had to worry that you were going to trigger that publisher liability because you were controlling content. So a lot of those boards said, we don't look, we don't know, we're leaving it up. And it was making a lot of places on the internet kind of dumpster fires. So enter Republican, then Congressman Chris Cox, and Democrat, then Congressman, now Senator Ron Wyden. And they drew up a whole new liability plan for the internet. And that's what Section 230 is today. It's a whole new thing. It's not, so when you hear people in this debate say, well, are these platforms publishers? They're not publishers, they're not distributors, they're their own thing. And that's what Section 230 was written to deal with. And what does Section 230 says? It says, if you post something on Twitter and it's a lie, a terrible lie about me, I have to sue you. I can't sue Twitter. So the speaker of the post is the legally responsible party, not the host. What did this cause? Oh, it meant that all those platforms, boards, but not the platforms, all of social media, can take stuff down, they can boost it, they can demote it, they can do whatever they want with it, and if people lie and cheat and steal, by the way, federal law is not a part of this. If you do something that's illegal under federal law, there's no exemption for the platforms. But if you just say, Jessica is a lunatic, she ran screaming out to the golf course, and I say, no, slander, no, I have to sue you, right? So that allowed these companies to take down really bad things without being treated as a publisher, which would have meant they would be in court all the time and they wouldn't exist. It's the First Amendment that allows these companies to take things off their private property, but it's Section 230 that allows them to do that without triggering suicidal product liability stuff, okay? So they kind of work together. The First Amendment says you don't have to carry speech you don't want. Section 230 says, and you won't have to spend all your time in court doing it. So, the best example I can give you of this, and it's something I think we don't think about enough, is online reviews. Those are third-party posts, right? Online reviews are third-party posts. There is no way that Amazon would have a section for reviews if Amazon could be sued by every person who got a negative review. You would not have Yelp reviews, you would not have reviews on Amazon, you would not have any of that. And the same goes for learning how to fix or do anything on YouTube, which as a general, old person, I've only recently kind of gotten into as a habit, and it's life-changing. I recommend it to you. But none of that stuff would be allowed to be left up, because the liability would just be too great that they get sued over it. And they're too easy to find. So Section 230 just says, nope, we throw those cases out. If you want to be mad at someone, you have to go find the speaker or the creator of that content. Okay, so all of that has actually worked pretty well. In terms of it being, I would say, the largest expansion and most egalitarian expansion of free speech, of all time, I would say. Not that the internet doesn't have its problems, but so many people have never been able to speak ever before in history. This one kind of leaves the printing press in the dust. But as you know, nothing's ever good enough. So now we're in a place where people on both sides, are very mad at Section 230. Republicans are mad because they say Section 230 allows these companies to take too much conservative stuff down. And Democrats are mad because they say Section 230 lets these platforms leave too much bad misinformation up. So, pick your issue, elections, COVID, whatever, denounce it and then blame it on Section 230. Good service here in North Carolina. Thank you. Friendly people. So I think for people in politics to say, hey, this has been great, this internet thing, but of course it has its problems. And let's be honest, what is social media but just a reflection of all of us? And human nature being what it is, what would we expect? That is not going to get you on cable news that night. So they don't say that. They say something must be done. And that is taking the knives out to Section 230. I think most of what will happen upcoming with Section 230 will appear in kids' online safety measures, and we can talk the details of those if you have questions about those during Q&A, but I will sum up my lens for looking at all those like this. Parents, good. Plaintiffs, bar, bad. So if it looks to you like a whole bunch of lawyers would get rich and not a lot of problems will be solved, that's your cue to resist in a law-abiding way. And just I'm a parent, I get it. It's like one more thing, you gotta figure out what's for dinner, there's always laundry, but this one's mostly on us. It really is just the new world we live in, and keeping them off social media until they're 16, 18 is actually not going to serve them well. It's much more important for us to be engaged with them about how to be healthy, responsible digital citizens. They're going to need that to find a job and to live in this world. We all had the people we knew freshman year in college who just went crazy because their parents had not let them eat fast food or talk to boys or drink, and they just went wild. And I think about that when I think about the stuff that wants to keep kids totally off of everything. There aren't too much, I know, but there's a middle path. And I'll just leave you with this one thought on online speech. As always, it's the government that remains the biggest threat to our citizen speech. So far, it's early days, but the Trump administration's kind of been a mixed bag on that. I think he's done some things that I find really encouraging. But if you hang out in the weeds, like I'm professionally obligated to do, so you don't have to. Some of the people he's appointing to these agencies that I guess maybe also are being dismantled, which should be fine, aren't so great on this free speech stuff. Brendan Carr at the FCC has been involved in threatening a lot of broadcasters about the way they edit things. And listen, I'm not here to defend mainstream media by any means, but I am here to say this isn't 1978 anymore, right? We have lots of alternative places to get our news, and I think people are better about, there's not just 3 networks to switch on at night. There's cable news, there's print news, there's conservative talk radio, there's everything on the internet. And I think this would be a great time for the government to get out of the speech policing business and not just take the opportunity to put the film on the other side of the scale, if for no other reason that, eventually it's all gonna flip back. And the precedents you set now are gonna come back and bite you. So I think that, I don't have any good predictions on what will happen other than it being DC. I assume it will be at least partially terrible. Okay, one left. How are we doing? Can we do it?
Yeah.
Are you with me? Okay. We're almost there. Okay. We're gonna do antitrust, but I'm gonna try to make it interesting. We'll see. Okay, so the last 4 years, we've seen sort of an astonishing attack on free enterprise from leadership at the Federal Trade Commission, and to a lesser extent, a Department of Justice antitrust division. So after a failed legislative agenda in 2019, the neo-Brandeisians were in control in the executive branch, and they did not hold back. especially the FTC. They embarked on the elimination of 40 years of economic learning and competition law. First popularized by Robert Bork, but now known as the Consumer Welfare Standard, which it's kind of been like the lodestar for competition law in the US, and it basically says this: the central question is, how are consumers doing in this area? Are consumers paying higher prices? Is there less output? Do we see a lack of innovation? Or have prices come down? There's plenty available and things new are coming out. And that's very broad, but that's sort of where we've been aiming for about 40 years. Because before that, antitrust law in this country was bonkers. You guys, trust me. It would raise prices to protect other competitors. It was crazy. We figured all that out. We grew, we learned, we thought we moved past it until 4 years ago when it all came back. So the goals of lower prices, increased output, and innovation were abandoned for sort of vague social goals like democratic equity in markets. I don't even know what that means. And a preference for certain business arrangements like organic growth. So growing without acquiring or merging was just like a preference because like the vibes were better or whatever. But it really was kind of at its core like a rejection of economics. Like they really weren't interested in the numbers, which is what we developed so much in the last 40 years before that. We really had a much better economic handle on what competition looked like. So Lena Khan at the FTC, she really had a problem with the bigness in the US economy, and alongside continuing and filing suits against companies like Amazon, Google, and Meta, and objecting to mergers in lots of industries, not just tech, but across the board. I'm sure you'd heard about some of them in the news. She also released new merger guidelines, which is like what they put out these things and they're like, listen, if you run afoul of any of this, you're probably gonna have a problem with us. If you don't, you're probably fine. It's like a little helpful document for you and your multi-billion-dollar corporation. But they released new ones and they were just so much more stringent and strict and really moved away from considering the consumer and moved towards sort of this bias for like keeping things small and cute. Which, you know, I understand when you're like vacationing and you want to like shop the small stores, but this is the US economy, like grow up. They also had strict things you can say outside the Beltway. They had stricter Hart-Scott-Rodino pre-merger notification rules. So that's if you're two big companies and you're going to merge, you have to send the FTC all of this information. And they basically, there's like a first request where most people get through, and then if you're really on the edge of being problematic, you get a second request. This makes the scary second request the first request, so that everyone is just, it's so much more difficult and expensive and time-consuming to just shake hands with someone and say, you and me, we're one company. And it's really chilled so much economic innovation in general, but I'll tell you one thing it's done with tech. In Silicon Valley, being acquired, if you're a startup, being acquired is so business as usual that you would never go into like a VC funding meeting without having a slide in your stack that said, this is who we think might acquire us. So if you're asking people to dump money into your company, you have to tell them how they might make that money back eventually, right? That's the exit strategy. It appears in the book, Venture Capital for Dummies. I love that that book exists, but it does, and it recommends having a list of possible companies that might buy your company for investors. It's like so mainstream. Anyone who's been in business knows that's normal stuff. And it's not just in tech that that's normal. Half of the small businesses surveyed in the US said that being acquired is important to their exit strategy. So it's just capitalism. But what the FTC did was just make that more and more difficult. And basically a lot of firms would tell people, and honestly, we're not even trying. And I think to stretch the tech boundary just a little bit, the pharmaceutical industry provides a really good example of kind of what we're talking about here. So there's a lot of little pharmaceutical startups that they're working on one thing. There's one illness, there's one disease, there's one thing that they're working on, right? And maybe they can raise enough money to get through phase 1 of a human clinical trial. So that's 20 to 80 people and an average cost of $28 million. You know, it's not chump change, but you can put it together. And even phase 2 of the trial. So that's like hundreds of volunteers and $65 million. But phase 3, folks, thousands or tens of thousands of people, $282 million. Just to get that pill, that's whatever, we're averaging, to get it into the hands of sick people, right? So that last phase might not be able to raise that money. And what your kind of natural exit is and your natural way to get it across the finish line is to be acquired by Big Pharma. Because what that does for them is they sort of outsource and de-risk their R&D. All that money they're going to pay for your company, they didn't pay R&D, and you've already gotten it through like 2 phases, like looking good. Let's do it. If you get rid of mergers and acquisitions, those things can't happen. The other theoretical exit would be to do an IPO, an initial public offering. Years ago, the Sarbanes-Oxley regulations made IPOs much more expensive, much more difficult. So the government's already pushing its head on that. And then with mergers, we did it again. And with the pharmaceutical startups, a lot of these people, they're not really good candidates for IPOs because they do one thing. So after they're done with their one thing, poof, it's gone, right? It actually makes a lot of common sense for them to be acquired because Big Pharma can get that thing across the 3rd phase, get that thing distributed, advertised, out there, and done. But instead of worrying about like barriers to entry, which traditional antitrust regulators might reasonably do, these last 4 years, they were busy erecting barriers to exit for startups. And that example in pharmaceuticals is kind of the same, but without sort of the life or death element usually in tech, but it's the same idea, right? Some brilliant weirdo college dropouts in his garage cooking up one weird thing. Like maybe he gets it going a little bit, but maybe he'd really love to sell that thing for $20 million to Google, who can actually make it work reliably and put it on everyone's phone and get it out there, and he'll go back and do another one. It's a virtuous cycle. It's not, mergers and acquisitions aren't always about killing the product. The vast majority of the time they're not. They're about putting money in investors and entrepreneurs' pockets, and a lot of times those entrepreneurs, they love that. They don't want to scale, and they don't want to always retire to a beach and do nothing. They want to go start another company. That's their jam. These guys love it. And if you stop it from happening, you're really hurting consumers who aren't getting the benefit of all those innovations. The last thing I'll talk about on that is the strange political bedfellows that group at the FTC has made. Now Vice President J.D. Vance described Lena Khan at the FTC, described her work as a bright spot in the Biden administration. I won't speculate on whether Vance is like a true believer populist or just has a vendetta against big tech that I think has been politically very useful for him. But I will tell you that who they put on the FTC, and I think Vance's involvement in that, has real implications for the U.S. economy, for you as a consumer, for business in general, for international competition on tech. That they've gotten a lot of juice off of beating up on big tech, but they also really need big tech if they're going to beat China. They need the little guys and the startups too, but if you don't have that virtuous cycle funding it, you can't compete with what China is dumping in with their industrial policy, which I do not endorse here, but I'm saying I'd like to unleash U.S. private activity against that because my money's on the U.S. every time if we let it be successful. So, I'm not going to make any predictions about that because it's so weird. JD Vance is over in Paris saying great things about AI, but then I see who he's putting at the DOJ at FTC, and I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. So I don't know what will happen there, but I know it will be interesting. And while we wait and see, I will thank you so much for indulging me and your attention tonight, and I will be happy to answer questions. And I will also not be mad at you if you don't want to answer questions and you just want to get something else to eat. Thank you.
Well, we're definitely going to do questions.
Oh, we are? You're gonna make me
I last week or last month.
I was trying to be nice to you guys.
Forgot to do that. That was really
Oh, have fun.
smart. So we're going to use this really cool other microphone and seek out people who have questions. This gentleman in the back over here. First of all, can you state your name?
So my name's Evan, and I'd like to thank you. And just asked the question prior, but thank you for talking about JD Vance and Made at Con. But what I've seen is kind of maybe not confused me, but surprised me is you have all these tech elites now trying to cozy up to Trump, who traditionally would be seen as liberal, whether it's Elon Musk, the head of OpenAI, and now Bill Gates. Do you have any? Is that just because they want government regulation protection, or is there anything else you see with that?
Yeah. So I try never to speculate about people's motivations because what do I know? What does anyone know? But I will tell you that I think the unfortunate reality for all businesses in the US is that we operate in a regulatory environment, right? And I guess it would be like if you asked me, does the CEO of Exxon really believe in wind power? In his heart of hearts, is he yes, it's going to be the wind for the win? I don't know. Maybe he does. Or maybe he thinks, doing a little bit of this gets the EPA off his back. I have no idea. And I guess I'd say the same for these tech CEOs. I think the big thing they've done is a lot of them gave $1 million each for the inaugural stuff, which is not a lot of money for them, is what's crazy. It's not a lot of money for them. And they get to go, and they get to be seen, and Trump gets to be seen with them. A lot of it's sort of weird human nature stuff, right? Where I think they're trying to make an overture so that they're not completely wiped off the face of the earth by the Trump administration. But I do think there is a real thing where Trump's starting to realize, and JD Vance too, that they actually do need these tech companies if we're gonna beat China. So I think there's everyone's making a little weird, awkward, on the spectrum effort to get along. And I also think, Biden put a ton of pressure on them to act as lefty as possible, right? It's not like Biden was Mr. Neutral. And Zuckerberg, years ago at Georgetown, if you're interested, gave a great free speech, and then never did anything about it. Do you know what I mean? So you're okay, have you always kind of had it right, but you felt like you couldn't do that? Because he does have a fiduciary responsibility to his stockholders, right? So you can't just come out swinging like Chick-fil-A, bless them, right? Because you have to you can't have an existential threat. That's not a satisfying answer, but you understand what I mean. The ExxonMobil example is the best one I can think of. You would kind of think, oh, why aren't they out there sticking up for energy? But they're I know we're probably destroying the world. Sorry, don't mind us. Everyone kind of has to get along and find their lane forward, right? Yeah. And not Elon Musk. Apparently that guy can just flame through it. Entertaining, for sure. But I think those tech companies, what they want is they want to continue to be profitable. And Trump has a real vengeance energy, about stuff. And so I think if I were them, I'd write them a check for $1 million and drag my wife to the inauguration and smell nice. I wish government would stay out of more things so that no one felt like they had to do that, but I don't think that's what we're doing. Is that kind of an answer? It's very nice of you to ask a question. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
George A. Bell, Hillsborough, North Carolina. Question is, I just want to follow up with Trump. If you read about his real estate empire, his big point was, I give to both parties. I want to continue to build in New York City. I never know who's going to come in the door. That's basically what the tech companies right now. I agree with you. They want to get along because they know down the line they may be out again with administration that's not very nice to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they got to live on the gravy train. Second, I had just a question. AI, what are the progressions up? Because we hear AI is sort of an introductory phase, and then it gets faster and faster. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so, it'll get better and better because it teaches itself, and that will mean very different things in very different industries. But what's the same across the board about letting it get better is that it needs a lot of energy. I mean, maybe not as much as you thought. The DeepSeek thing, I still kind of feel like they just use big chips, but anyway. It needs power, and that's another thing you're going to see. Like a lot of these tech companies have been like, zero emissions, we're neutral, and now they're like, actually, we're going to need a ton of energy, so they're like building nuclear plants. We're also going to see a lot of really great nuclear stuff happen because of all this. But those are going to be the brakes on it. The brakes aren't going to be on the AI itself. The brakes will be like fueling all of that. And I think how you will see it in your life will be not all at once. Like it's not going to be like, okay, now there are no lawyers anymore. It's going to be a lot of these tools will be co-pilots to people's jobs. They'll take away the most boring parts and they'll make you able to focus on the interesting creative parts. The part that I'm most excited about is the medical stuff, because I do think it's going to be absolutely unbelievable. But there'll be a huge efficiency gains in everything. Traffic, imagine. I don't know how bad the traffic is around here, but I live in Washington, D.C. area. And if AI can make traffic better, that would just be fantastic. I think the medical stuff is going to be the game changer stuff. We've spent a lot of money and a lot of time on cancer. We've made progress, but I think AI is going to blow a lot of that progress out of the water in the best way. And there'll be some terrifying weaponry. We've had that, by the way. I just tell people when they're like, oh my God, it could destroy the Earth. I'm like, I've never been alive when we didn't have weapons that could destroy the Earth. We got it. I don't know how, but we have managed to handle it. So I think the medical stuff is going to be the way people experience it most. There's just going to be a lot of things that AI is going to personalize to your health that you could never ask people to do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great.
I've enjoyed your sense of humor,
Thank you.
Mr. Roddy's sense of humor.
Thank you. It's a good room tonight. Hot room.
Yes, that's for sure. AI, I've just come in contact with AI, ChatGPT, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I can send my tenants a nicer rent increase letters now. That's for sure. I wanted to get your take, as I read today, that Trump trying to acquire Greenland.
I'm trying to acquire.
Denmark is now trying to acquire California, and I wanted.
I mean, I don't know. I guess it's California, so it'd have to be a. What do they do? The proposition. Just to keep it maximum Denmark. They would have to be Proposition Denmark.
Proposition
Is there anything? Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. I mean, I think, it's funny because my job, like, I cover this like stuff that is interesting because it really will impact all of us, but it's boring. It's very hard to keep my attention on like, who's the latest appointee to the FTC, when on the news in the background is like, we're taking the Panama Canal, we're renaming things. I'm like, oh, that's fun. That's so fun. So I don't know.
Great place to invest in real estate.
Yeah. And people love Panama. I don't know if anyone's been, but everyone I meet who's been to Panama is like head over heels for it.
72 degrees all year.
It's very pleasant, clean, tidy.
Degree humidity.
Yeah. Well, that's what got us the first time down there, right? The mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about Greenland. Maybe we could put data centers there. It's cold. It's not being used. I'm open to that. I just thought that we should get together and invest in that. It's a great idea.
Are there any other questions? So I've got a question, and it has to do with China. So we know that China is very ambitious, to say the least. And what are you keeping your eyes on with regard to China's interest in our tech industry? And as a follow-up, is China doing stuff behind the scenes like maybe making it harder for our tech companies to innovate by engaging in lawfare, perhaps?
Yeah, I think China's economy, from what I understand, has some pretty nice holes in it. I like that. It makes me feel like we're end of the Cold War feelings, right? When we pulled back the curtain on the Soviet Union, we're like, oh, what a mess, fantastic. I'm hoping for a similar result. On the tech front, we are being a little sloppy. An example I will give you, you're so close to being done, and now I'm going to talk to you about spectrum. So spectrum is the waves that move through the air, and they do many things, and they make your cell phone work, and there's some that they use for Wi-Fi. And it turns out that government agencies sit on spectrum and they just hoard it, like shameless toads. They just sit on it. The Department of Defense has a zillion gigabytes that they assure us they'll use, but they don't. Anyway, China is out there just pushing spectrum rights out to every innovator, just making it the international standard. It doesn't seem important. We are falling behind China with spectrum. And if we don't get our government hoarded spectrum into private use in Wi-Fi, unlicensed, shared license, your phone, Verizon, whatever, we will not have companies that get there first to set the international standard. And that starts to matter when people build products on those things all over the world, or where you're on the battlefield across the globe. We won 4G, we won 5G, and now we are woefully behind because the Biden administration just slept on it. Department of Defense doesn't really want to figure out how to clean up their use of the spectrum so that more can be shared or auctioned off. So there's those kinds of you would never hear about that, but it's a huge national security issue, and China is laser focused on it, and they show up at every international standards meeting, and they're whooping our butts on spectrum. And it's just not, like I said, it's not as fun as we're renaming a goal, but it's really important. And we've taken US tech leadership for granted, and then we've spent all our time complaining about how Facebook jail sucks, which it does. But you really have to stay out in front because China is focused on winning AI. They are not far behind. And on the basics, and also China has the habit of going, as long as we're on telecom, to developing countries and saying, hey, we'll put in your telecommunication systems. And it's not like they give them back, right? China has control of that. And we've been a pretty effective counter just with our private businesses. We were ahead for a long time with wireless and with Wi-Fi, which sounds just like a convenience to your house, but Wi-Fi is actually kind of a national security issue. Like keeping us all connected and informed and all of that stuff is part of what keeps this country resilient. And we're losing that. And I haven't really seen as much focus on that from the Trump administration as I'd like to see, but that, that might be coming. It's only been a month? Not even a month? Not even a month, you guys.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted.
Great. Well, are there any more questions? Okay, so I guess we're gonna wrap it up.
Thank you
very
guys so much. You indulgent, sweet people.
Thank you. I mean, so I think y'all can understand why when I saw Jessica speak, heard her talk, I was really interested in having her come because she's so knowledgeable and kind of fun to hear your take on stuff. Thank you so much. Part of the thing of my job is as the ambassador is to let you know that we count on your financial support to keep our operation going. It costs us about $1,200 a month that we have an event here. We really appreciate when you step up and make a contribution. It's just $25 if you're not here for the first time. So please just take a minute, scan your phone over the QR code, which will take you to the registration page, and you can pay. We have this wonderful venue, and we are also inviting Jenna Robinson next month. She's going to talk about innovation in higher education, and because those things might seem somewhat oxymoronic, I wanted to have her come up here and explain to you quickly what innovation in higher education might look like.
Great, so I absolutely agree that sounds like an oxymoron. Normally, I'm the one saying that higher ed is one of the most hidebound sectors in the economy. And in many ways, that's still true. It's one of the most regulated sectors in the economy, but we have been seeing some innovations. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the University of Austin as a new school, Ralston College, a new school, and on the horizon, I'm hoping for new accreditors, which 10 years ago, I would have said, snooze, I do not want to talk about accreditation, but now it is actually, we're starting to see some movement, because accreditors are the gatekeepers to federal money. And so what they do is extremely important, and the fact that we might see some innovation and some competition in accreditation means that the market in higher education is, I hope, about to get really exciting. So that would be my talk next time.
Great. And thank you very much. We've gotten you out of here at a really pretty nice time. Get home, and we appreciate it very much for coming. Thank you, and be sure to follow us on the website, Harwood Salons Raleigh. Thank you.